Okay, good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Thursday night is Erev Shabbos, special Shabbos Mevorchim, Chodesh Shvat, and we have now the pleasure of doing this special segment called For the Shabbos Table, which is sponsored by the Rubin family. Mamish, it's an amazing grant that they give, and they have a special schus because the last time I checked, last weeks for the Shabbos table already had just on Torah Anytime 490 views, so probably now it's crest 500 already, and that's not with Kol HaLashon. A lot of people in Lakewood and different places only use Kol HaLashon. They don't even have computers, and it's not with the Torah Communications Network and the YouTube and the Zoomers and everything else. So what a schus. They asked that we should be mispalo for them, that they should be zeicher to a ben zacher, and they should have atzach and ruchnius and gashmius. So I want to add also that we should learn the for Shalema, for Rivka Bashir Leah, and for myself, Moshe Meir ben Estefadel, Dvar Bashashabina, and my friend Yitzi Kurtzer in Scranton, who sustained some injuries in a car accident and is now, because he has broken ribs, he is now in the hospital with pneumonia, that he should have a refuah shalema b'seich shachar Yisrael. So we know that Yisro said that Ati Adati, now I know, Ki Hashem Elokim, Ki badavar asher zodu aleim, because that which the Egyptians plotted befell them. And that is that every makkah was midah keneged midah, measure for measure, which precludes any element of chance. So in this week's parasha, we know that there was al ha'adam v'abehema l'shchin pareach, that boils broke out. So it's interesting, what was the midah keneged midah of the boils? So often I quote from one of the Gurei Ha'ari, one of the cubs of the Ari over 500 years ago, the Shach al Torah. So the Shach says that it's because they made the Jews work in the sun. It was a tropical climate, and they made them work throughout the day, even at noon. A lot of places at noon they have a siesta for 2 hours because it's very hard to be under the sun. They made them work non-stop, making 600 bricks under the sun in the chamimus, and their skin was burnt from the sun. And therefore the shchin, the boils, caused the Egyptian skin to burn and to have pain. And, again, when we learn this, it's always to teach us not to be like Paro. I remember that one of my relatives worked for a company that had a warehouse that had no air conditioning whatsoever in the summer. And it was a warehouse. The walls generated tremendous heat, and it was like an oven in the warehouse. And people had to work in that warehouse the whole day. That's mamish ma'aseh paro. Now, we have to know, when we hear this, there are people that bring up children, they're home for the summer, and while they have in their, a lot of people can't afford central air, while they have in their bedroom a nice air conditioner, the children are in their rooms, they're sweating in the heat. You have to know that the Rabbeinu Shalom is very makpid about this. The Taisus Shalom says that the reason why they were punished with boils is because in the making of the bricks, the Jews had to be on top of the ovens making the lime and making the bricks. And therefore, the makkah was done with the piach hakifshan. The boils where Moshe Rabbeinu took the soot from the furnace. But again, this is putting them amongst the heat throughout the day. And again, you have to know bakers, pizza makers, cooks in yeshivas that are on top of ovens and ranges in the heat throughout the day. We have to be sensitive to this, not to do maaseh para. Hine anochi nogev kol gevulcha b'tzvardem. I will smite your entire border with frogs. Now, I've mentioned this in many of my shiurim, that the Avudraham says, I always open it up with a question. If I would ask you, what was the worst makkah? What was the worst plague? So everybody would say, makas b'chayris. You'll say that it says, kol magei foisai, maybe it was hail. Probably if you were pushed to analyze it, you would probably say that the easiest plague was frogs. I mean, lice was very uncomfortable. Boils killed. Having wild animals, having no water to drink and to bathe in dam. Tzvadeya is squishy frogs. Okay, frogs, they're a nuisance, but fact of the matter is, Avudraham says it says Tzvardeya 10 times to tell us that the makkah of Tzvardeya was equal to all 10 plagues. It was the worst of the plagues. And the understanding of this is, there's a hint to it, that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was asked to pray that the Tzvardeya should stop, he prayed al devar hatzvardim. Now we translate it on the matter of the frogs, but al devar hatzvardim is on the voice of the frogs. You see, the frogs croaked. And they croaked non-stop for 7 days and 7 nights. And each one croaked with a different pitch, with a different noise. And one was a soprano, one had a baritone, right? So imagine that you were in a room and there were 100 alarm clocks set, each one with a different sound. Boom, boom, 100 alarm clocks. And they rang 7 days incessantly. The Egyptians couldn't sleep. And it says that they went insane. Now, there are those that say that this was Mida Keneged Mida, because the Egyptians were constantly yelling at the Jews. Work, 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 constantly yelling. They didn't allow them to sleep. They didn't allow them to... So therefore, this was Mida Keneged Mida. In the words of the Lekach Toiv and the Rabbeinu Bechaye, it says that the Egyptians never gave us a moment of menucha, a moment of rest. And therefore, during the Tzvardeya, they were never given a moment of rest. Now, this idea of the intense pressure, because they couldn't stop the Jews, because if they didn't do 600 bricks, if they fell short 599, they took a child instead and put it into the walls of Pithom and Ramses. So there was. That's what it says. Ve'eslachatzeinu. It says, and I got to explain the pasuk. Ve'eslachatzeinu, the oppression. Zu adachak, that's the pressure. The Ritva learns the chak differently. The Ritva learns that in Goshen we were shtupped. Millions of Jews were shtupped to the point that it was a ghetto life. There was such a pressure of living on top of one another. But the simple meaning of the chak is that we never had a single moment to rest. So we have to know that there are husbands that never give their wives rest. They come home, why isn't this done? Why didn't you take care of this? There are wives that never give their husbands rest. They come home after a hard day's work. They're up early in the morning. Okay, now that you're home, you could finally help me with this, and you could do that, and you could do this. Have to know that when we don't give people menucha, the house is supposed to be a place of menucha. That's an obligation of a husband and a wife, that the home should be a place of contentment. That's what it says. It says in Rus that Naomi said to Rus and Arpa, she hopes that mitzena menucha isha beis isha, you should find contentment, every wife in the home of her husband. But when we don't give rest, then the Rabban Yisham punishes Mida Keneged Mida, that the person won't have rest. Here a person wonders, why when he gets to work, his boss never gives him a minute of rest. As soon as he finishes something, the boss says, okay, now I have another project for you. Or he gives him a project on top of a project. He has no menucha. What's? Because he doesn't make his house a place of menucha. It's a mida keneged mida. So a wife is wondering, why is it I have a minute to sit down and rest, and another child gets sick, and another child throws up, and then I have to take him to the doctor, and then they call up that I have to bring my car to the shop, and then I got this bill, and why is she never getting any rest? Because her husband comes home, she's not giving him any rest. So this is a very important idea. Now, the Lamaisa is, we have to know that this is important for educators too. You know, we have Kanai Nahara, our children are super children. And they have Limudei Kodesh and Limudei Chayil. They have Hebrew studies and they have secular studies. It's very fine. What happens? What happens is the Rebbe gives a Gemara test. The same night that the Rebbe gives a Gemara test, a social studies teacher decides to give a social studies test. Now, you get a social studies test, you have to remember a lot of facts. How is the child coming home after a long day in yeshiva supposed to study for a Gemara test and a social studies test on the same night? And the other teachers also gave homework. That's d'chak. That's d'chak. That's very wrong. There has to be a czar that overlooks and makes sure that the children are not giving overlapping tests. It's very important. Otherwise, it's a maisa paro. It says, "Vayasu keina chartumim." The chartumim also tried to do the lice, v'lo yechaylu. They weren't able to. So Rashi says, you know why they weren't able to? She'eina shade shoylit al beria pchusa mikisayra. The shade cannot have dominion, control on a creature that's smaller than a barley corn. A louse is smaller than a barley corn. So their black magic, which employed shadim, could not work. Now the Maskil David and the Gur Aryeh explains, because the Chartumim Rashi says is Noicher Betamya, is using the bones, Tumah from the bones, Tumah from the dead. And an etzem that's Pachas Mikisayra, a bone less than a barley corn, is not Makabal Tumah. So they don't have power on something that's less than a sa'ira, because there's no tumah source on something that's less than a sa'ira. I just want to let you know that the Ramban says over here simply, they couldn't make lice because they had no power to create something. To create something new. They can't create a creature. They ask on this Ramban, so how did the Khartoumim turn the stick into a snake? That's a question. And they want to make a difference between Khartoumim and Mechashvim. Maybe Kishif is different. There's another pshat over here from the Azakanim Balei Tosfos, that there's an entirely different reason why they couldn't do the lice, and that's because the Khartoumim only were able to do magic when their feet were in contact with the ground. We learned that out, that when Shimon ben Shetach had to deal with the 80 witches in Ashkelon, he told 80 of Talmidei Chacham to pick them up off the ground. Because once they're disconnected from the ground, they can't do their magic. So because the earth turned into lice, so the feet of the Khartoumim weren't on the ground. And therefore, since they weren't on the ground, they couldn't do any magic. I had a thought that this might be yet another level. You know, you have to always learn that there's more to what we learn than what we saw even the first 75 years of our life or 50 years of our life. We know that it says that Moshe Rabbeinu was told to go out to Paro. Hine Paro yotzei hamoima. Paro is going to the water. Now Paro, who, considered himself a god, and they worshipped the Nile, so he used to say that he was going to, have Dvekis with the Nile god, right? Liya Eira. The truth of the matter is that he claimed he didn't have to go to the bathroom, but he did have to go to the bathroom. So he would go to the water every morning and go to the bathroom. So catch Paro there as he's going to the bathroom. Right? But now there could also be that Hine Paro Yotzei Hamoima, as Paro was in the water, he couldn't even do any kishuf because his feet were not on the ground. But anyway, I want to share with you a very, very fundamental Ramban. Very fundamental Ramban. V'lakachti eschem li la'am, I will take you to me for a nation. V'yisi lachem le'elokim, I will be to you as a God. V'datem, and then you will know, ki ani Hashem Elokeichem, hamoitzi eschem mitachas sivlois Mitzrayim, who took you out from the burdens of Egypt. So the Ramban says and adds a very important Nakuda over here. It says the great Ramban, Zer Tzadik Brachas Chusu Yogan Aleinu, V'lakachti eschem li la'am, Kishebasem lahar Sinai v'kablu es haTorah. When you come to our Sinai and you accept the Torah, that's when you will be to me as a nation. Because it says over there, by Kabbalah HaTorah, v'yisem li segula mikol ha'amim. Then you will be as a treasure from all the nations. So v'lakachti eschem li la'am is at Har Sinai, says the Ramban, and the pasuk continues that then and only then you will know v'datem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem hamoitzi eschem mitachas sivlois Mitzrayim. Artzko put out a wonderful sefer from Rav Druk, just came out on Shmos, I believe, this week or last week. And Rav Druk asks a very basic question over here. Is it only by Har Sinai that we recognize that Hashem took us out of Egypt? Didn't we recognize that when by Maknas Bechoros Rashi says that we went out with a Gevura Gevaya Umefursemes, with a great and public might? Didn't we realize that by Kriyas Yamsuf? So Rav Druk quotes the great Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky. And Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky says something very fundamental over here. Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky says that people could see miracles and wonders, but if they don't have the prism of seeing it through the lenses of Torah, they won't appreciate it. Now I have to tell you that this explains, we would think that after this year, there shouldn't be in Eretz Yisrael any Jew that's not a believer. Iran sends 800 rockets against us. The makers of the Iron Dome and the David Slingshot and all the other sophisticated hardware said that there was a margin of error, a large margin of error. Not one missile killed anybody. It was such an open, stupendous miracle. But not only that, they've been raining down thousands upon thousands of missiles upon us. And every time the missile or the fragment falls on an empty lot or even in a place where the people vacated. I mean, the Yad Hashem is so blatant. When there was a locust attack and it ravaged all the fields in the Shemitah year except for the fields of the town of Kaimimius, where the locust just didn't enter Kaimimius. There's no explanation except that they kept Shemitah. You would think that everyone that saw that has to become a believer. But the answer is, says Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, you know when you're going to believe Ki Ani Hashem Elokeichem Hamotzi Eschem Mitachas Sivlos Mitzrayim? By Matan Torah. Because it's only with the education of Torah. It's only if the mind is primed by Torah that a person sees clearly. Otherwise, the Yetzer doesn't allow people to see. By the way, that connection between taking as a nation and giving the Torah, we say in the Birchas HaTorah, which the Gemara says is the most choicest of the Birchas HaTorah, Asher Bacha Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'Nasan Lanu Es Torasai. Right, with the giving of the Torah, that's when Hashem chose us from all the nations. V'Yisem Li Skula Mikol Ha'amim. If you remember, I told you that the Torah doesn't have commas. It doesn't have punctuation. So it says, Vayore es dvar Hashem me'avdei Paro, those that feared the word of Hashem from the servants of Paro, Heinis es avodav es mikneu el abotim. They chased their cattle and their workers, their slaves and their cattle into the house, because Moshe Rabbeinu warned them anybody caught outside would be killed by the Barad. The Meshech Chochmah says that the Chiddush is that the Avdei Paro, under the direction of Paro, told people that they weren't allowed to bring in their stuff. And therefore, see how the Meshech Chochmah reads this pasuk. Hayore es dvar Hashem, those that feared Hashem, may Avdei Paro, over the commands of Paro. They were afraid more of Hashem than the servants of Paro. Heinis es avodav es mikneu el abotim. You have to know how to read a pasuk. I want to, before I conclude, I want to, first of all, make an appeal for people to become part of our Zoom DAF family. You know, we had as many as 41 people on the Zoom, but really, this Zoom reaches all over the world. And definitely people that are within reasonable time zones. It reaches, all 50 states, Canada, and we'd love to have you join our Zoom family. The way to do it is very simple. Now it's from Motzei Shabbos, when we learn 2 blot, throughout Sunday through Thursday, when we learn 1 blot, it's 8 p.m. It's the same time now every night, 8 p.m. You put it into your computer, zoomdaf.com. You have to go on Zoom and put in zoomdaf.com, and then the password is 4 letters, my initials, RMMW, Rabbi Moshe Weiss, all caps. We'd love to have you try it out, see if you like it. Be part of our family. We have all kinds of characters, believe me. And also, if you want to sponsor a share, whether a daf, whether a chumash share, 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. Thank you very much for joining us. See you on Motzei Shabbos at 8, and have a good and wonderful Shabbos.